Somaliland, amidst these challenges, seek international recognition and investment, highlighting its relatively peace and democratic governance compared to Somalia. I wish the country well in their democratic elections in 2 weeks' time.
As to the possibility of the UK recognising Somaliland, and I would urge our new government, let's be the first, let's recognise Somaliland. But I believe that recognition by us would be followed very quickly by other Western countries, including the United States.
Questioning the title of today's debate, and whilst His Majesty's government may not formally recognise Somaliland, failing to acknowledge its 6.2 million people does not make them invisible. To speak of tensions in the region whilst omitting the most democratic and stable society within it is in effect to disregard an entire nation from our discourse. Somaliland's people are committed to democratic principles that outshine any of its neighbours, yet they find themselves absent from the very title of our discussion. Now, my lords, today we find ourselves addressing a matter of both immediate and long-term consequence in the Horn of Africa. Specifically with regard to Somaliland, there exists a unique opportunity for the United Kingdom to act in accordance with our moral responsibilities and strategic interests. Somaliland's democratic development offers, as I said, a stark contrast to the persistent instability of its neighbour Somalia, and presents a prospect for stability across a region long beset by conflict. And with our support, Somaliland could contribute to the security of one of the world's most vital maritime corridors. Since declaring independence in 1991, Somaliland has demonstrated a steadfast commitment to democratic governance. My lords, this is not an abstract ideal, but a tangible process evidenced by elections such as the one poised to be held on November the 13th, 2024, 2 weeks' time. Its fourth presidential election since 2003. This commitment to democratic values must be viewed against a backdrop of rising tensions in the broader Horn of Africa. Now, the region is marked by significant security challenges, including the influence of the Houthis in Yemen, Al-Shabaab and ISIS, all of which threaten stability. And the ongoing Houthi conflict, fueled by Iranian arms, disrupts shipping routes across the Gulf of Aden and now poses an increased threat as the Houthis have begun collaborating with Al-Shabaab, arming them with Iranian weapons to extend their reach across borders. Al-Shabaab continues to present a major threat, particularly in regions close to Somaliland's borders, such as Sool, where the group exploits weak governance for recruitment and cross-border incursions. Furthermore, ISIS has established a presence in Puntland, raising alarms about potential infiltration into Somaliland's contested areas. These security dynamics are exacerbated by the region's fragile governance and the vulnerability of marginalised populations, whom terrorists, of course, exploit for recruitment. Here, my lords, the UK's engagement in counter-terrorism and governance enhancement is not merely beneficial, but is essential. Moreover, the geopolitical landscape is complicated by the actions of key players in the region. Djibouti, a strategic nexus hosting military bases for countries such as the United States, China, and France, plays a crucial role in supporting the economic stability of landlocked Ethiopia. However, Djibouti faces challenges in balancing relationships with these foreign powers while managing regional refugee flows. Eritrea, under President Afwerki's one-party state, has seen a normalisation of relations with Ethiopia since 2018, yet remains, of course, embroiled in human rights abuses and regional conflicts, notably in Tigray. So Ethiopia itself is beset by internal conflicts, in the Tigray, as I've said, and in Somalia, the persistent threat of Al-Shabaab, coupled with political instability and corruption, further complicates the regional landscape. And the reliance on the African Union mission underscores the need for a concerted international effort to address these governance challenges. And at the heart of these rising tensions are territorial and border disputes, such as between Ethiopia and Eritrea, and clashes over contested regions like Sool, Sanag, between Somaliland and Puntland. The dispute between Djibouti and Eritrea over the Dhamays mountain and island further illustrates the fragility of regional stability. Internal ethnic tensions in Ethiopia, exacerbated by the Tigray conflict, and violent clashes among various groups pose additional risks of escalation. So, my lords, Somaliland, amidst these challenges, continues to seek international recognition and investment, highlighting its relatively peace and democratic governance compared to Somalia. The recent provisions of iris biometrical technology by Taiwan makes a commendable step towards ensuring electoral transparency, and Somaliland faces considerable challenges from foreign interference in its elections. Both neighbouring states and external actors see these elections as opportunities to advance their geopolitical interests. Thus, it is critical to support Somaliland in strengthening its electoral integrity, ensuring transparency and fairness, while preventing undue foreign influence. Additionally, external influences from Middle Eastern powers such as the UAE and Qatar further complicate local politics. China's expanding presence in the region, particularly its military base in Djibouti and strategic investments, highlights the competing interests of global powers. And as these dynamics play out, we must remain vigilant against the potential for escalating conflicts to ignite broader regional wars, which would have, of course, devastating humanitarian consequences, including famine, disease, and mass displacement. In this complex context, I believe the United Kingdom, with its historical ties and global standing, is uniquely positioned to play a constructive role in Somaliland's future. Recognising independence would not merely acknowledge a political reality, but would strategically align our objectives in the Horn of Africa. Such recognition would signal our commitment to supporting democratic governance, reinforcing stability, and ensuring secure trade routes. Now, critics may argue that such recognition could destabilise the region, yet, my lords, we must question whether adherence to outdated paradigms serves the cause of peace and progress. Supporting Somaliland's independence is not a matter of principle, it aligns with our strategic interests in a region marked by volatility and uncertainty. I spoke in your Lordship's House on the 25th of July about the Ethiopia-Somaliland Memorandum of Understanding, which the Noble Lord referred to. I hope it will turn into a full-scale agreement. And if I may conclude, I will end as I began. The people of Somaliland should not be invisible, most especially here in the UK. And whilst we do not officially recognise their home country, we owe it to recognise them, support their most basic human right, and wish the country well in their democratic elections in 2 weeks' time.
The one country in the region that gives us hope, and add some remarks to what the Noble Lord Pollock has already said. And of course, I'm talking about Somaliland. And I think it is important that we remind peers and others who listen to this debate that just a slight bit of history, because in 1960, Somaliland emerged as an independent country from the British Empire after many years as British Somaliland. And after that, it very quickly took steps to merge with what was then the trust territory of Somaliland, historically the Italian Somaliland, to form a union. And there was originally huge optimism and hope of creating a country where all Somalis could come together and live together peacefully. Sadly, that didn't happen. Things got worse. Military dictatorships based in Mogadishu, and discrimination against those in northern Somalia, with the attacks on civilians, the mass killings, the genocide, Somali jets bombing parts of northern Somalia and destroying Hargeisa, almost destroying completely that city. But out of those decades of horror, Somaliland declared itself free of Somalia in a declaration of independence back in 1991. And now, for the last 33 years, that proud country has been asking for the world to recognise it. It's doing everything that we in the Western world and Western democracies continue to flag up as showing what a democratic, free country should be doing. It has regular, as been mentioned, free and fair elections, and in a couple of weeks we're going to see their 6th presidential election. And like those before, I hope, and I'm sure they will, be peaceful. It has an active civil society. It's made huge strides on the advancement of women's rights, even beginning to tackle what the noble lady Baroness Harman mentioned, the scourge in that area, female genital mutilation. And the current president is even considering banning FGM altogether. All sexual violence and rape acts go through the criminal justice system and are not, as elsewhere in the region, dealt with by community or customary law, which have been outlawed. And it has a strong and fair justice system and religious tolerance. Indeed, in this whole region, independent Somaliland is the only beacon for democracy and the rule of law, and we should be lauding what they have achieved. And yet, despite that progress, their achievements, and their loyalty to the United Kingdom, and let's not forget how many Somalis died, sacrificed during the Second World War when they joined us in fighting fascism. In spite of all of that, we always find reasons to procrastinate and not officially recognise it. And I find it interesting that when I had a question a couple of weeks ago as to the possibility of the UK recognising Somaliland, one or two peers were urging so much caution that it seemed they didn't even want to discuss Somaliland, and almost implied that those of us who raised it were being reckless. It was also very telling that in the response to the minister's response, the noble Lord Howell of Guildford was able to point out that the same answer had been given to him to read out on the question of Somaliland being recognised when he was minister at least 10 years ago. So I think that should give us food for thought, because there obviously hasn't been much change in the Foreign Office briefings over those years. Now, I'm aware, and of course we all are, of the complexity, as been mentioned by other peers, of the region. And that does cause the Foreign Office officials and Foreign Office ministers to be careful, very careful in their diplomatic efforts. It doesn't, of course, stop other countries from looking after their own interests first. And we're seeing, of course, now the beginning of China getting very much involved in the Horn of Africa, and having said publicly that it's geographically strategic importance to them, it's got abundant resources and enormous potential, and they've now got a special envoy. I want to say something about aid, because aid that's been going direct, aid should be going, any aid that we're giving should be going directly to the people of Somaliland rather than via Somalia, where it is used as a political tool. And we remember that during the COVID pandemic, vaccines earmarked for Somaliland were deliberately delayed in Mogadishu, released only hours before they expired. And this did expose the politicisation of humanitarian aid. And state-directed aid is also typically routed through Somalia. And understandably, the Somaliland government has repeatedly declared it neither can nor will accept development or budgetary support filtered through Somalia's federal government. They view that as an affront to a country that is running itself freely and successfully. We should be rewarding good governance and using Somaliland as a beacon to show the rest of the region what can be achieved. Now, Human Rights Watch produced a brief for this debate which highlights all the terrible atrocities and obscenities and human rights abuses that are taking place in Ethiopia, Eritrea and Somalia. And just like the noble Lord Pollock said earlier, the word Somaliland in the Human Rights Watch wasn't even mentioned. And that's, clearly they have not wanted to distinguish between Somalia and Somaliland. And I think that is very, very sad that the benefits of what's been happening there are not being put forward. And our government's position seems to be, as mentioned in the Lords recently, that it's up to Somaliland to negotiate with Somalia. The Minister said in the questions recently, it is absolutely an issue for Somalia to resolve. Well, I just think that is actually not feasible at all. And if we look at what's happening in Somalia, the idea that they will suddenly say, or even after a lot of negotiations say, Somaliland, you can be independent and we will recognise you. But I think the idea that we're setting a precedent, and I know that that's been mentioned by a noble lord, that we're setting a precedent if we recognise it. But surely the Somaliland situation is unique because they were independent. They recognised back in 1960. And there would probably be a backlash from Somalia. But I believe that recognition by us would be followed very quickly by other Western countries, including the United States, and that this would actually encourage those people in Somalia who really want to see changes. It would encourage them to engage in dialogue. Surely we should be supporting and encouraging democracy around the world. And recognition to me is not just a moral imperative, but it would give the United Kingdom a strategic advantage that aligns with our foreign policy goals. It would be the first step to promote peace, stability and democracy in the entire Horn of Africa, benefiting all their people. And I know that the Noble Lord Collins is looking at this very carefully, as was said in the short debate we had on Africa some time ago. And I would urge our new government to look at this again, to be brave, not to wait till somebody else goes. Let's be the first. Let's recognise what Somaliland has done and can do, and how that could play a real part in improving the terrible situation that we've got in that region.
Kamaran cheegi bangiga oo la jaar Dhahays. U kaydso lacagtaada mar kasta iyo meel kasta. Ku dhex isticmaal adeegyada Somtel iyo Dahab. Ku xidha akoonkaaga bangiga oo ka dhex maamulo lacagtaada. U soo wareego la jaanqaad dunida casriga oo ku maamulo abka Dhahays nolol maalmeedkaaga maaliyadeed. Hadda kala soo deg App Store iyo Play Store abka Dhahays.
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Magacaygu waa Dr. Mzaya Maxamed. Ku soo dhawaada Shifa Pharmacy. Halkan waxaan adeegyo ku haynaa pharmacy ah oo ku xiran cliniga Medina Medical Clinic oo ku yaalo Jigjiga Mall wadada caanka ah oo Lake Street. Adeegyada waxaa kamid ah delivery aan sameynaa oo xaafada guriga lagu geenaa daawada dadka oo aan awoodin inay pharmacy-ga imaadaan. Waxaan sameynaa travel medications dadka safraayo daawooyinkooda oo complete ah, vaccination, dhakhtarkaagaan la shaqeynaynaa insha Allah, wixii maaragtay caafimaadkaaga iyo daawooyinkaaga ku saabsan oo complete ah helaysaa. Convenience-ka helaysid halkan Shifa Pharmacy waxaa kamid ah clinic oo nagu degan oo Soomaali ay joogaan oo luqadaada maaragtay aad wax walba ku helaysid, oo nextna pharmacy ku degan oo aad imaanaysid adoona maaragtay dhakhtarka wali ka dhamaanimo daawooyinkaaga lagu sii diyaarin karo. mar waxaa dhacdo adoo clinic joogtid daawooyinkaaga inta lagu diyaariyo adoona ka dhamaanin dhakhtarka daawooyinkaagina hore u sii qaadatay. Hadda lacala ka tagtid delivery-gaas aan leenahay. Marka ku soo dhawaada Shifa Pharmacy.